things I'm here to try and look at is the role of an organisation like my own to play in helping you connect with the care system. One of the things I think you mentioned in your presentation was about that reluctance and that resistance to digital being as mainstream as traditional methods. And I wonder whether you all might have a view on whether you think that's a generational thing, you think that it's naturally going to expire, and as perhaps the cohort of those wanting the services changes, in parallel with that, the cohort of those commissioning services is also going to change, and it's kind of a changing of the old to new guard, perhaps. That's maybe how I see it. But thoughts?
I know the one who's not trying to sell a product. From where I sit, I would guess that, or assume that the reason of Go Digital is seen as being a more tricky thing to implement is probably a combination of the current implementation of digital in the NHS is pretty dire. You know, my experience being a junior doctor was it was a hindrance, not a help. And so you've got very few exemplar solutions where you go, that thing's amazing, why don't we have more of that? Instead you have a lot of, that thing's terrible, can we not have more of that? And so you've got that predisposition of, this is going to be bad, not the predisposition of like, oh, this is going to be great. And so you have some of that, and then because so well of the solutions, the pathways at the moment are so manual, it's part of breaking out what you currently do. I'm so used to doing this, therefore that's the only way of doing it. So I think my main answer to that is there's a lack of really good examples of great user experience and really impactful digital innovations which have scaled across the health service.
I can follow up as well. I think at least looking at some of our customers and the way they use it, I think they see issues both on the patient side and on the clinician staff side. It's also you have to pay attention to both ends of the user experience here. I think a lot of the customers are quite surprised because they believe that the elder generation is able to cope with the systems. That's not the experience they have.
Our time to speak closer.
The results, and they document this through the assessments as well. But we do see use of content is different. I guess you guys probably noticed when they want to use videos versus text, and this is a huge difference. So choice of content, that definitely matters, I think.
To follow this up, I presented this about 7 years ago, and I built the MVP to a group of surgical consultants, and none of them got it. They just like, don't get it, don't need it. And then each one of them, over the next few months, phoned me on a Saturday morning, can we get this in yesterday? And it was weird. It was like, I don't know why Saturday, I mean, consultant meetings on a Friday, I think, oh my God, how do I actually sort this stuff out? But there is an aspect now where all my peers thought it was really good, and they all then used it at their consultant interviews to come and implement change. So the next generation coming forward, I think, is more open to the ideas of what's possible and have a lot of energy to push innovation. Maybe the previous generation has tried to push stuff and then not everything works out and they get a bit tired of it. I don't know. But I'm hopeful. You know, I found physios are amazing drivers for change in the NHS. They just like take control of everything. And everywhere I go, I try and find a really good physio who's going to be that clinical champion that's just going to win all the battles and everyone just does what they say. But yeah, some amazing people in the NHS really want to make change. So I try and put my energy where those people are. Does that make sense?
But I also want to add that is an X factor here that has actually nothing to do with, I think, with the, because I'm a therapist and I'm working as a therapist for years, and I think of course you can have the hassle when it comes to the technology, but you actually need to have and create a safe atmosphere, because what you're actually doing is to put the head on the stake here, because am I doing a good job? That was actually what I think therapists think when they get the results back when you treat the patients. So you need to create a curiosity, a culture of inquiry if you are going to deliver these kind of services, I think. So that's important to remember when you as Czechware need to be aware of that. And also one other thing, that the therapists, they will pull the patients under the bus and say that the patients, this is a heavy burden for the patients, they're not able to do it. But actually, it's the therapists. And they need to be safe and curious.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It's a great question, actually, in terms of just... I mean, I think I would add to something around training as well. I mean, I'm also a therapist and a psychologist, and I mean, I know through my training, and surely I'm maybe the old guard that's going to move on, you just don't get necessarily, and maybe it's changed a little bit, but I don't think it's changed or changing enough, particularly as sort of psychological therapists, about actually working digitally. And we're doing some work now at the moment to think about actually doing more placements for trainee clinical psychologists coming in and just seeing what is possible. And I think that will also help a lot. But I think everything everyone said has been really interesting and certainly connects with my experience as well.
And I think on the procurement point you were asking about, I think your point around the consultants not realising it's a problem until a Saturday is there is a disconnect at times between the people who have the pain and the ones who can influence procurement. Junior doctors are a very good example of, they rotate every 4 months, 6 months. They don't get the agency to say, this is awful, can we change it? Instead, the consultants, who quite a lot of the time can say, actually, can you, as a junior, can you sort that out, please? And isolate themselves from the problem helps. But there's also a bit around designing your pathways, then finding the digital solution which fits them, or at least doing a co-design rather than buying a product and then seeing how it fits. I noticed when I last read the virtual ward guidance, it was go to procurement, find a solution, then build your pathway, not build a pathway, then find out what solution you need.
Hello. I don't know if I need a microphone. I think my mouth is big enough. Hi, I'm Sarah Pope. I'm from the North Central London area, and I am the clinical lead for a learning disability service based in the community. We use digital healthcare monitoring in the community, and it's very successful with our client group, and it feeds into our primary care system, so our GP practices and other areas that access the primary care system can review clinical observations of our clients in the community. One thing I do find really hard though is that we are the ones in the community teams that have to translate the digital technology for our client group to access, understand. And it's really, I suppose, a question, a plea, but when you're designing these things, do you consider how they're going to be used by our learning disability client group and those from the neurodiversity as well? And do you actually kind of include them in the design of these systems so that they are actually able to say, look, this is not going to work, or this is going to work for me in this way? And it's a plea really to please include them so that they are accessible to this client group, because we know, the WHO has published a lot of data and about the digital exclusion of people with a learning disability. And if we are moving towards a more digital, inclusive healthcare system, we must include this already excluded population. Please. Just say yes.
Yes.
That's the answer.
Well, I can start from our point of view. Yes, the system is accessible, but again, it's limited to the technicalities of accessible, and I think it's a lot about the content as well here. How do you make sure that the content is understood? So we work a lot with the children, and we make different forms of the formats of the questionnaires, use symbols, and we try to adapt. But the way we work, we provide kind of the tools, and then people like you build the content on top of the platform. And I think we spend a lot of time with them, trying to make sure that you fit the content to the target group, because I think that's also quite an important part of the problem.
Can I add on that? I think you're actually raising a very important point, because the thing is that when you're a therapist or a patient, the information is huge. You can have lots of information from these systems, but actually you need just a couple of things. Is it working? How is it going? Are the patients having a good outcome? And so it could be a diversity between the persons that actually making these systems and deliver it, and we as a therapist. So you're raising a very important point that I think that it's important to that all the informations and the persons that are using the systems actually are getting closer together.
I think there is a wider problem in digital health, healthcare IT of holding suppliers to account and making sure they provide what they provide. And we build solutions not just in healthcare but in other areas, including government. And you've got things like the government digital standard, which has accessibility as one of its core things, and if you don't, you won't pass that assessment, and you will be in trouble. We don't seem to have that rigour in healthcare procurement. And when we did the COVID app, that was a GDS compliant solution. We had all the language was down to the level of a 7-year-old. It was translated into, I think it was 11 languages. It was screen reader compatible. It was properly accessible, as you would expect a government service to be. We at times do not procure our solutions appropriately in the healthcare industry to meet standards you need to meet, which is bizarre given that the people who are likely to use these solutions are more likely to have accessibility issues.
Was there a dissection of the process and the pace at which that moved, and has that been shared back into the NHS? So that ability for both the NHS and the commercial sector to move at that pace and do it well and do it safely. Where's the are you aware of where the learning from that's gone? I've not seen it, and I probably should.
I don't think it's been widely disseminated. It's part of UKHSA is who actually commissioned that piece of work. Some of it is very COVID specific. So it was things like we had the ICO and the NCSC, so National Cybersecurity Centre, physically in the room, as well as the MHRA physically in the room. So instead of having to do a kind of like single thingy way to go, is that fine? Yes. Is that fine? Yes. Is that fine? Yes. Which allows you to do things very quickly.
You can genericise that, though, can't you? That's working smart, it's working agile, it's working collaboratively, and it's working quickly, isn't it?
Yeah.
But irrespective of the context of the problem you're trying to solve, and that learning's gold, really, isn't it? If you have more confidence that we can do something differently, there's insight there we shouldn't lose.
I'm happy to talk about it as well as my colleagues who are at the back.
And I think, as well as that, is that the government is one body. The NHS consists of hundreds, and each area decides its own way of doing things. And there is something about, I think you were genericizing that, and actually making this is how you do it, and not allowing for this regional variation so much.
Yeah, I'm aware I'm derailing the conversation, but yeah, the fragmented piece does make having the knowledge and the skills you require to sense check some of these products very difficult.
I also think because I think your point really in your plea, I think there's accessibility at the heart of it, but there's also user voice, not just in terms of a tick box, but actually being absolutely partnering in a process. We recently went through, and I was leading the organisation project team on a DTAC accreditation, which is Digital Technology Assessment Criteria, which came out of NHS Digital. And accessibility, as you're saying, is huge. There's actually there are four or five sections. Most of them are pass or fail, but then accessibility, you actually get a sort of a score, as it were. But to my mind, it goes some way to addressing issues around accessibility, the sorts of things you mentioned. But I think we really could go much further in terms of some of the granularity about particular needs, and I think we're very much still on a journey around proper personalisation, and that's from something more basic, be it sort of signposting in terms of curated material. How do people navigate, for example, on our platforms, a vast array of material and content, and starting to really, and this is more about what's been happening, what we've been able to do in California, which we're hoping to bring back to the UK, because we had a bit of a blank canvas there, as opposed to sort of being here in the UK as almost a kind of legacy provider for over 20 years in this space, is around actually algorithms and AI assistance that actually helps people just manage and get the best out of what is available. But then it's also working a lot with seldom heard groups. But I take your point about those people with learning disabilities, I think are often more marginalized. And one of the things that we're kind of revisiting is actually this whole space, as I mentioned, around neurodiversity. Because that, you know, thinking about your original point about changes and developments and what is coming more to the fore, you know, we're all now much more aware of, hopefully, and we're still finding our way with how best to address and support people with neurodiversity, you know. So it's not really as a don't worry sort of thing. It's I've heard you, and I get what you're saying.
Co-production is the way forward.
Yeah.
Because if you want to understand how a group receives something,
Yeah.
you need to include them right from the start.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we've learnt by always including our client group in what we do going forward.
We've been fortunate enough to win 4 of NHS England's national awards or grants, and on each of them there's a section on PPIE. So you have to have co-production. It's one of the core parts of it. In terms of accessibility, because we give a content creation platform, we have static checking of do you meet WCAG 2.1AA standards, and we will not allow it to be deployed unless they meet it. So we're sense checking what the clinicians are deploying, make sure it meets those standards for them.
Any other questions before lunch? Lunch. Sounds like lunch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.